Hello, welcome to my session. Hello, welcome to my session. And today we'll be discussing Harold Pinter's play The Birthday Party. We'll be particularly focusing on Act 3, and the final scene will be having a discussion, analytical discussion on this act, and this is the final act of this play. And as a whole, we can say the structure of the birthday party seems very traditional. There are 3 acts in this play arranged in chronological order, and the first and third acts parallel one another. We see that both Act 1 and Act 3 begin with Meg and Petty's morning routine, although Act 3 reflects the play's descent into depravity. We see Meg does not have breakfast to serve in Act 3, and she is frantic to remedy the oversight. As an interesting side detail, she does not remember to pour Petty's tea, whereas she forgot in Act 1. Because of what she has gone through since Act 1, Meg is undergrounded, not so easily submerged into the superficial routine of the beginning. While in many ways Petty is the central character of Act 3, since he changes during it, we see at the very beginning when Meg realizes that the drum has broken but does not remember how it happened. Petty simply tells her she can get another one. There is a bit of dramatic irony since the audience realizes that the drum represents Stanley. Well, it represents Stanley much as it is broken, so he is mentally unstable. We see that Petty's growth in the act is realizing that while Meg there is a bit of dramatic irony since in many ways Petty is the central character of Act 3 since he changes during it. Well, at the very beginning of Act 3, we see Meg realizes that the drum has broken but does not remember how it happened. And Petty simply tells her she can get another one. And there is a bit of dramatic irony since the audience realizes that the drum represents Stanley. It represents Stanley much as it is broken, so is he mentally unstable. We see his mental instability as well. And Petty's growth in the act is realizing that while Meg could conceivably get a new boarder like Stanley, his particular absence will likely shatter her fragile world. We see the play ends with his lie to her. Petty lies to Meg about Stanley, a lie intended to prolong her eventual breakdown. And considering the implications that Petty might have a sense of the strange Meg-Stanley relationship, Meg-Stanley relationship, his desire to maintain her illusion, his desire to maintain her illusion reveals his discovery of Stanley's importance. If she falls apart, then their pleasant, comfortable life might also fall apart. Petty lies, to Meg in the final act when, Meg wants to know whether whether Stanley is still in sleep or not. Petty says yes, whereas Goldberg and McCann have already taken Stanley away. Well, Petty is also central because we realize he might always have had some intuition, his world's sinister nature. And he has largely been absent from the play thus far, and in many ways is pitiable for being a potentially willing cuckold. Something Goldberg and McCann suggest to Stanley during their Act 2 interrogation, which is the which causes the interrogation that happens in Act 2 causes Stanley's nervous breakdown. Yet Petty reveals an astuteness in Act 3 through his conversation about Stanley's mental breakdown. The fact that he is not surprised to hear Goldberg suggest it gives us reason to suspect he had seen indications of mental problems here. So when we learn that Petty is an accomplished chess player, the symbol helps us to understand him. We can understand him better than ever before. He seems to know more than any other single character, and he knows that Goldberg and McCann are not what they seem. He knows that Stanley might have mental problems. He also knows that his wife's mental problems might be exacerbated if he were to end her affair with Stanley. And he realizes when he cannot win the battle to keep Stanley around, and he chooses to live in a pleasant stupor, to not address any of these problems. Well, certainly this can be interpreted as cowardice, but it is not accidental. As you can see, like a chess player, he knows how to strategize and has chosen a life of pleasant comfort over potential difficulties. So he takes comfort out of his playing chess outside his home, where Stanley is staying all through. So he chooses not to leave in the sense that Goldberg accuses Stanley of in Act 2. But it is a choice. When he yields to Stanley, quote unquote, don't let them tell you what to do. The final, advice which Petty gives to Stanley when Goldberg and McCann are taking Stanley out of the house. He is in many ways describing his own life, and one in which he engages nobody and hence has little responsibility. Well, Petty is cowardly safe in his domestic delusion, but it is his own choice. And then we see that Act 3 is full of sinister images and situations. We see Mac's discovery of black car, that brings a theatrical mystery to the fore, and she is immediately, she immediately interprets it as a sign of her own breakdown. We see, Meg to remember Stanley's threat to have her taken away in a wheelbarrow, and at some point of Stanley's conversation with her, Stanley threats to have her taken away in a wheelbarrow. So once she sees the car outside the house, she has a nervous breakdown. She thinks this car might be meant for her. It might take her away, which once upon a time, at a point of, conversation between her and Stanley was referring to. And as a vehicle intended to remove debris from place to place, the wheelbarrow represents motion of unworthy objects. We see Meg's fear of the wheelbarrow reflects not only her fear of her own irrelevance, but also a fear of movement, of change, from the comfort wherein she can maintain her delusions of importance. What is ironic here is that Stanley's threat has come true not for her but for himself. It's really very ironic. And yet her fear over the black car is not misplaced. As you can intuit from the earlier acts, as we can say from the earlier acts, Stanley's absence might in fact compromise her own sanity. We also see Goldberg reveals the depth of his sinister potential in Act 3. Goldberg is able to maintain some air of charm apparent when he assuages Meg's concerns about the car, but he refuses to answer any questions about it. His silence about certain details only deepens the aura of dread that permeates the play, both in terms of the car and in terms of other details, like the briefcase or his purpose for Stanley. Most sinister in Goldberg's own breakdown, his world is clearly coming undone, most likely as a result of whatever sexual behavior he forced upon Lulu. Whereas he has shown nothing but suave detachment in Acts 1 and 2, he is a wreck in Act 3, knocked out, we can see, and undone. He is unnerved by such feelings since he has never been sick before. He lacks his characteristic control, even lashing out at McCann for calling him Simi. We see that when McCann calls Goldberg Simi, he becomes instantly furious. Is this sickness perhaps or a sign of a guilty conscience? That's the question. Or has his liaison with Lulu submerged some childhood neurosis? You can ask. As he mentioned the name Simi as a name from his past, this latter interpretation could certainly be defended. What Goldberg's breakdown reveals is that every person is reliant upon his own delusion and hence subject to pain and difficulty when that delusion falters. Though he has presented himself as a strong and untouchable, Goldberg centers his world around the pretense of family morals of a nostalgia for the old days, which were better, bigger, and more respectful. And considering the way he speaks of his mother in Act 2, it is possible to interpret this delusion as an expression of childhood and control. Indeed, Goldberg shows a desire to be something of a parent, both to Stanley, whom he forces into an infantile state of confusion and fear, and to Lulu, who he treated as a daughter in Act 2 and then as a prostitute in Act 3. We see Lulu's confrontation leads Goldberg into further lies about her compliance and a situation he does not handle well until McCann finally chases her away. And interestingly, his final tactic is to elicit a confession from her in a world where we are guilty of our own delusions and sins, and forced confession becomes a threat. Stanley's situation also reveals the sinister nature of the play. We can say, ironically, he is most frightening because he is suddenly so presentable. The repeat of their Act 2 interrogation now has the sense less of attack and more of a bedside vigil. All of his delusions shattered, and Stanley can only receive these promises silently, with repeated readings or viewings of the play. As you can see, an audience might realize how Stanley's breakdown could be any person's fate if he or she were forced to confront his or her past sins and delusions too forcibly, as Stanley did. From this perspective, the scene is even more horrifying. In fact, this scene, is most horrifying scene in the play. And finally, Meg remains blissfully unaware of the situation. It is telling that the play ends with a confirmation of her delusion, and the final exchange is full of dramatic irony. She has constructed a reality that we know to be false, both because Mag was not at the belle of the ball and because Petty was not there to know it. And the play ends with a scenario of ambiguity and delusion, which falls perfectly in line with themes it explores throughout. Finally, we can say that in a published speech entitled "Writing for the Theatre," Pinter himself offered that Petty's exclamation, quote, "Stan, don't let them tell you what to do," unquote, defined his mindset, his plays, and his entire career. Okay, so it defines the purpose of Harold Pinter as well. Neither Pinter nor his characters conform to established means of interpretation, and he makes every effort to avoid easy answers that could be interpreted as the author's moral message. So instead, we are to leave Pinter's plays, the birthday party included, unsure exactly what is true, both about the character on stage and about ourselves. And that's all about that's all about for today's class. Seeing you in next session. Allah Hafiz.